Hello, bruvs. We're back with Napoleon, Bisexual Emperor. Those for whom kindness to animals excuses almost any depravity may care to give a point to Napoleon for his tolerance of Josephine's horrid little pug, Fortune, though it bit his legs as he's clambered into the marriage bed. But his letters make it plain. I'm going to my regular voice here. But his letters make it plain that it was a case of love Josephine, lover dog, and this was confirmed by his attitude to a gardener's dog, whose owner was surprised by Napoleon's forbearance about the damage it did in the garden, until Napoleon said slyly that perhaps the mongrel might rid him of that other. As for horses, it seems that he regarded them purely as means of transportation. What's he supposed to hang out with the horses? Hey, bruv! And riding as a good remedy for liver trouble. With his rather short, plump thighs, he was an ungainly horseman. Maybe I should actually show the book. It might be thought that of all aspects of Napoleon's character, his ruthless ambition and lust for conquest could be accepted without argument, but many have believed that his assertions that he desired peace and was not interested in further conquests were sincere, unlike similar pronouncements by Hitler, and that he was borne along on the irresistible flood of aggression by his inability to accept the pre-revolutionary frontiers of France, leaving the country worse off than it had been when he came to power. It is hard to reconcile his claims to a benevolent wish to unite Europe with his insistence on what he regarded as the natural frontiers of France. These included Holland, and he said that he would rather sink Holland in the sea than give it up. His true voice rang out during a state council when he cried, "People are speaking of peace. I hear nothing but the word peace, when everything should resound with shouts of war." His threats that if he were brought down, he would bury Europe beneath the ruins of his throne were echoed by Hitler. But Hitler really intended to make Europe drain the cup of bitterness to the dregs and finally almost welcomed Gotterdammerung. The German people had shown themselves to be weak and unworthy of the great destiny he had planned for them, and they deserved to perish. The Corsican upstart, a shade less ruthless than the Austrian corporal, may have despised the French but hesitated to plunge them into civil war. A monster, perhaps, but not so foul a monster as Hitler, who gloated over the filmed dying moments of generals, whom in sadistic frenzy he had caused to be publicly garroted for plotting against him. And you always hear about the brutality of Hitler, which is true, but Stalin's was about fivefold. And for some reason, we never speak of Stalin. It's as if he never existed and didn't murder 50 to 100 million people. It's kind of odd when you think about it, other than the fact that most communists are in control all across the planet, so maybe that's the reason why. Historians continue to be divided as to whether Napoleon really was impelled by the grand design of a united Europe, or whether he invented these grandiose theories whilst in St. Helena in order to justify his career. He claimed that his ambition was of the highest and noblest kind that ever perhaps existed, that of establishing and consecrating the empire of reason, and of the full exercise and enjoyment of all human faculties. Some students of politics believe that the balance of power would have been better secured had Napoleon beaten the Russians, and that his mistakes and the self-interest of the Allies who brought him down in 1814 led to the two world wars and the Cold War which followed them. Napoleon probably was genuinely sick of war, especially after the marked physical and mental change which came over him at about the age of 35. He was gifted with political foresight and may have hoped that he would really win that illusory war to end wars, for he wrote, "War will become an anachronism. The future belongs to peace. The time will come when victories will be won without guns or bayonets." If we can accept these striking words as forecasting the Cold War, we can chalk up to Napoleon another successful prophecy. But having done so, I must record at least one bad shot. He assured Lacasse, I think that's what it says, that England was bound to fall under French dominion, being by nature intended to be one of our islands. Common marketeers, beware. Whatever view may be taken about Napoleon's true aims for Europe and his political foresight, this analysis of his character has revealed a hard-hearted, inordinately ambitious, callous egotist who was little moved by the sacrifice of millions of men to his megalomania, and even seemed to derive some reinforcement of his sense of power by viewing the bodies of men who had died doing his bidding. Unchristian even in many Frenchmen' eyes, sacrilegious, he seemed to put himself above God in his supreme self-confidence and his contempt for mankind. "My mistress is power," he told the Roederer, who said that Napoleon loved power as a musician loves his violin. What made the French follow him and respond to his increasingly insatiable demands? What was the secret of his power over the minds of those who were to him the instruments of his ambition, whom he secretly despised? No doubt many thinking men, many aristocrats who accepted state appointments served him because he was inevitable, even if it was military power which enabled him to say, like Louis XIV, "L'état c'est moi." It was soon obvious that he was much more than a mere soldier. His astonishing flair for organization, for getting the right men to carry out his ideas, and his efficiency impressed them and enabled them to hope that his lust for conquest might be satiated, and that he would, in the end, be good for France. Such hopes must have driven many Germans to serve Hitler, though his noisy vulgarity and sadistic excesses were repugnant to them. But as well as the intellectual qualities which impressed the intelligentsia, Napoleon possessed a gift which weighed even more heavily with them and with the common people as well, what today is called personal magnetism. Even before he rose to fame, it was noticed that he was the center of attraction in almost any company. Among the contradictions in his character, one fact is unchallenged: his ability to fascinate people. Many descriptions of Napoleon's appearance were left for us by those who knew him at various stages of his career. Claude Manceron, bold enough to paint the national hero, warts and all, has described Napoleon's face as at one period as a bloated suet mask, which was once compared to a boiled calf's head. It looked better in profile when the three chins were less obvious. There are plenty of unflattering descriptions, from the odd-looking, farouche, unkempt young subaltern to the fat, vulgar-looking little man of later years, but few omitted to mention the unusual quality of his face. There is, in fact, fairly general agreement among men and women alike that there was a classic nobility in his features. Surely all the many portraits which bear this out were not painted by flatterers. His death mask shows that the mental and physical suffering of his last years had not erased the serene dignity of his face in repose, which was said to be still discernible nearly 20 years later when his coffin was opened, before his body was taken to France for reburial. The classic beauty of his face was enhanced by his pallor, upon which most observers commented, some seeing in it the glow of ancient marble, while others saw in the pale olive complexion a suggestion of ill health. To some English visitors, it was a very rare complexion we've never seen before. There was some strange quality about his eyes, a fixed, motionless, and unblinking stare. One of the many who remarked upon this was the German poet Heine, who spoke of the power of Napoleon's eyes. Some found his cold, intense gaze disquieting, and as his expression was often rigid and stern, his rare smile was a welcome relief. Cam Hobhouse, the English traveller and diarist, saw him early in the 100 Days and described his lips thin, but partially curled, so as to give his mouth an inexpressible sweetness. Mrs. Abel, who as Betsy Balcom was one of his earliest friends in St. Helena, wrote that his smile and the expression of his eye could not be transmitted to canvas, and these constituted Napoleon's chief charm. But the true secret of his charm was the trouble which he took to bring it to bear on those whom he meant to enslave. He would be compellingly, irresistibly charming, and many of those who fell under his spell when he chose to play the charmer tried to analyze and explain his almost hypnotic power to bewitch those whose allegiance or affection he wanted to win. It was in fact studied play acting, and no man has ever been more thorough in this as in everything that he did. He studied every aspect of any subject which interested him and brought all his great powers to bear on the matter in hand. The protein, Jesus Christ. The protein quality of his nature, and the fact that so many different sides to it were seen by different people can be largely attributed to this love of play acting. He was intensely interested in the theater, shocking, and numbered many actors and actresses among his friends, and he did not drop them when he became emperor. He deliberately studied how to play his part as emperor with his friend Talma, the great actor, yet he wore the imperial trappings without true grace or distinction. A parvenu. Eyebrows were raised when, during the coronation ceremony, he attracted the attention of Cardinal Fesch with a prod in the ribs with his scepter. But this could just have been more of his play acting. The role, this time, of the rough soldier to whom all this mummery really meant very little. He was almost invariably to be seen in very simple uniform, and in this he showed wisdom, for it suited him to perfection. Two good examples of his profitable use of his sense of the theater occurred in 1814. The first, when he solemnly entrusted the care of his wife and little son to his soldiers on parade, and swept many waverers back into his camp before departing for his campaign to save France. The second was the emotional farewell at Fontainebleau, when he embraced the commander of the guard and then the eagles, and adjuring the soldiers never to forget the glory they had won together, carefully set the scene for his equally theatrical return. The royalist writer Alfred de Vigny, in his penetrating evocation of an interview between the emperor and Pope Pius VII at Fontainebleau, puts into the mouth of the gentle old pope a concise two-word diagnosis of this theatrical side of Napoleon's nature. After a show of bluster has failed to overawe the pope, who merely murmurs comediante. I don't know how to say it, I'm not French, not even human, but Napoleon switches to pathos and tries to throw a rosy glow upon his lofty ambitions for France and for the world which evil men had so wickedly frustrated, only to grow angry again at the Pope's comment on his new role. Tragediante. What's he, Italian? I guess the Pope is Italian, ain't he? As a practical psychologist, Napoleon knew that to influence people he must give them a sense of their own importance to him, and although people meant little to him except insofar as he could use them for his own ends, he would make the person whom he was mesmerizing believe that the great man was genuinely interested in every detail of his life and interests, though the great man often did not wait for answers to the machine gun rattle of his questions. General Gorgold said that he was a really fine master to serve and never failed to give people credit for such talents as they possessed, and often imputed to them good qualities which in fact they lacked. Men as well as pictures require to be placed in a favorable light, said Napoleon. General Count Caulaincourt was one of his closest associates, and his frank memoirs give us a reliable insight into his personality. He wrote he had, when he wanted, something seductive, persuasive in his voice and manner. No man ever had more charm. When he wanted, de Segur, another companion of the Russian campaign, also spoke of seduction and saw it as a feminine faculty. When he wanted to seduce, his manner was one of the ineffable charm, a kind of magnetic power. The person he wishes to attract seems to become beside himself. In these moments of sublime power, he no longer commands like a man, but seduces like a woman. Boris Sokolov, in a doctor's biography, quotes several people who had themselves experienced this magnetic power of Napoleon's charm, which was admitted even by that shrewd surgeon, Baron Larry. Larry, not Larry. Larry. Whatever the nature of this gift, he used it on many occasions to enslave those upon whom, for the time being, his comfort or interest depended. I mean, he's the emperor. What are these people supposed to say? No, you ain't getting shit. Having seen how easily he bewitched the ship's companies of his Majesty's ships, undaunted, and Bellerophon, though a captive, he really believed that he would be welcomed in England, given the Garter, and allowed to end his days there as a popular and respected country gentleman, even perhaps being buried in Westminster Abbey. His banishment to St. Helena was a profound shock, and so threw him off balance that he later not only failed to charm, but instantly antagonized the man on whom his well-being ultimately depended, the governor, Sir Hudson Lowe. Napoleon's methods of winning the adoration of his soldiers give us the clearest evidence that he made a deliberate study of the art of influencing men. He was intensely proud of the veneration which he inspired in the French army, and often spoke about it, saying that he had taught men to die. He could say to them, "Frenchmen, I need your lives. You must give them to me." He often stressed the importance to a military leader of the use of words, and he gave a wonderful demonstration of his own methods to the British commissioner in Elba, Colonel Sir Neil Campbell, who wrote an illuminating account of this theatrical performance. Enlarging for some time upon the influence which he possessed over the minds of French soldiers in the field, he said that under him they performed what no other chief could obtain from them. This he ascribed to his manner of talking to them on particular occasions. With soldiers, it is not so much the speech itself as the mode of delivering it. Here he raised himself on his toes, looked up to the ceiling, and lifting one of his hands to the utmost extent, called out, "Deployez les aigles." I don't know what the hell that is. Deploy les aigles. There go my egos, motherfucker. He then related to me that when the Battle of Marengo was almost lost, he redeemed it by calling out to the men who were then in perfect rout. Or is that rout? He had then with himself only about 40 horsemen, but by putting himself at the head of the retiring troops and speaking to them in a certain manner, they rallied immediately, crying out, "Allons donc!" and "Avant!" It is like music which either speaks to the soul, or on the contrary, gives out sounds without harmony. This was not the only occasion on which Napoleon compared his words to music, which speaks to the soul, and he said, "You must speak to the soul in order to electrify the man." But alas, this stupendous scene was wasted on Colonel Campbell, who summed it all up with the dry comment, "It strikes me there was something wild in his air throughout this last visit, and in many of his observations, the above among others."